And thank you so much for helping yesterday. Well, this morning I would like to speak to you on Esther, the tremendous influence of a woman of faith. There are times when I'll be driving down the road, and I'll turn the radio on, and I'll hear Jeff Foxworthy, the comedian. I think everybody here have heard of Jeff Foxworthy. And one of the things that made him famous over the years is his segment on "You might be a redneck if." Now, I can be a little offended by these things, but being from North Carolina, but I think that one of my favorite ones is, "You might be a redneck if you ever cut your grass and find a car." That one's tough. That one's tough. Well, some creative lady came up with, "You know you're a mother when," and here's what she said. "You know you're a mom when your feet stick to grape jelly on the kitchen floor and you don't care. Your idea of a good day is making it through without a child leaking bodily fluids on you. Your favorite television show is a cartoon. You are so desperate for adult conversation that you spill your guts to the telemarketer and he hangs up on you. You count the sprinkles on each kid's cupcake to make sure they're equal. And then finally, I save the best for last. Spit is your number one cleaning agent." Well, one thing is for sure. A mother is a person who has great influence. A mother is a person who has great strength, great love, great patience. When you think of a mother, you think of strength, love, and patience. If you will, take a look at this clip.
Before I was a mother, I thought I knew. I thought I knew what love looks like. I thought I knew the value of sleep. I thought I knew the sound of success. Before I was a mother, I thought I knew the beauty of a prayer, the potential of my joy, the length of my patience. I thought I knew the depth of art. The soul of laughter. Before I was a mom, I thought I knew the stress of worry. The beautiful torture of learning. The healing of peace. I thought I knew how to keep my head.
This is the third time, let's go!
I thought I knew how to fix my parents' mistakes. I thought I knew how to be a cool mom. Before I was a mother, I thought I knew. But now I realize I had a lot to learn.
And you were teaching me the whole time, even before I was aware of it. You were welcoming me into the sisterhood of mothers.
A calling as old as love itself. being a mom.
That's so true, isn't it? Yes. It's so true. Before you're a mother, you think you know. And then all of a sudden you become a mother. And what insight you are given. Well, on this Mother's Day, 2016, I would like for us to look into the Old Testament at a woman of great faith. Because I believe that this woman is someone who has a lot to teach, not only women, but also mothers. Her name is Esther. Whenever God, I believe, led me to preach on this subject of Esther this week, I began ransacking the book of Esther. Had a legal pad out, made tons and tons of notes. And throughout the course of reading and studying the book, the word that came into my mind that I put at the very top of page 1 and put a circle around it is the word Holocaust. Why the word Holocaust? Well, the reason why I put this word there is because Esther lived in a day in which a major political figure tried to exterminate the Jewish people. Esther lived in a time when there was this man by the name of Haman who did everything within his power to try to commit genocide against her people, the Jewish people. We are first introduced to Esther in Esther chapter 2 and verse 7. So if you have a Bible, would you turn with me please to Esther chapter 2, and let's look together at verse 7. Esther 2:7. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. This girl, who was also known as Esther, was lovely in form and features, and Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. Now, we're going to be getting into some really interesting things in the life of this lady by the name of Esther. But before we even get into the story at all, I want to make this one major observation. We have not properly understood the book of Esther unless at the end of this message we say, God is amazing. Because even though Esther is the main character to the human eye in this story, really the main character is a sovereign God. Someone who is working behind the scenes. Someone who is impressing people to do certain things. God is at work in the hearts of men and women. It's almost like there is this chess match that's going on, and God is moving the pieces, and he's doing every single thing in order to protect his people and to bring glory and honor to himself. It's true that we are going to be very impressed with this lady by the name of Esther. But I want you to understand that none of the qualities that we see in her would have ever been realized if it had not been for God working and leading and guiding and protecting behind the scenes. So please understand that when we look at this great lady, a lady like many of you, that really it is God. This book is about God. It is about his providence, his working, his sovereignty, his greatness, his power. And you come out of the end of this book and you say, what a mighty God we serve. And so if at the end of this message you are not struck with how powerful God is, then I will have failed in this message. I want to make sure you see Esther. I want you to see her qualities. I want you to see her courage. But most importantly, I want you to see how God is working in a powerful, powerful way. Centuries earlier, God had made a promise to a man by the name of Abram who became Abraham. We find this in Genesis 12, 1 through 3. If you have a Bible, flip back to Genesis 12, 1 through 3. And this is what God says, Genesis 12, 1 through 3. The Lord had said to Abram, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." One of the things that we learn about God in the Old Testament is that God is holy and that he insists that his people be holy just like he. God is perfect in his character. And in order to have fellowship with this holy God, he insists that his people fellowship with him in a holy way. And so all throughout the Old Testament, we see God calling his people to holiness, and yet we also see them swerving and varying from that lifestyle that he's called them to. We see them rebelling against God. We see them doing things that break the heart of God. We see them doing unholy things. And as a result of that, their relationship with this holy God is sometimes strained, and sometimes strained to the point that he has to go through extremely drastic measures in order to get their attention. There's almost like this cycle that takes place in the Old Testament of God blessing, of the people rejoicing. They obey him, then they begin to backslide. God judges them, they repent, and then they turn back to him, and then the cycle goes on over and over and over. And one of the ways that God gets Israel's attention in the Old Testament is by occasionally having foreign armies coming into Jerusalem and ransacking the city, and then taking the Jewish people to their country so that the Jewish people literally become exiles in other countries. That happens several times in the Old Testament. And that is the backdrop behind the book of Esther. The people of God have sinned. They have broken God's heart. They have violated his laws. And as a result of that, God has them now in exile. They are in Persia, in exile. Some of the people are beginning to filter back into Jerusalem, but the general context of Esther is that the people are in exile. But here's the point. Even when God's people forget him, he doesn't forget them. It kind of reminds me of what Paul said to Timothy. Remember the verse when Paul said to Timothy, "Even when we are faithless, he is still faithful." You and I, from time to time, will find ourselves in these situations where our hearts are breaking. We will begin to doubt God. We will begin to question what he's doing in our lives. Things won't make sense. And it will be almost as if we are doubting him to the point of having very, very little faith. But the beautiful thing about God is that once he gives his love to you, he never withdraws it. He's committed to you. And even when we forget him, he doesn't forget us. The beautiful thing about God is that God always keeps his word. One of the things that's beautiful about the Bible is that when we hear God saying, "For God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him will not perish, but have eternal life." When we believe him and take him at his word, he saves us. And we are saved eternally, and we are secure. And our salvation is not dependent upon our faithfulness. It is dependent upon his faithfulness, and he is faithful. Well, this morning, what I would like to do is to become very practical with the story of Esther. And I want us to examine what are the qualities in this woman's life that made her such a woman of influence. I could have listed 15, but for the sake of time, because you do want to go home and eat lunch at some point today, I just want to talk about 5 qualities of a woman of influence. Well, it is very safe to say that Esther was a woman of influence. I mean, here is a Jewish girl, and she became the queen of Persia, and as a result of that, she saved her people from genocide. So I would say she is a woman of influence. What made her that way? First, she was a good listener. You know, the one thing that is characteristic of mothers is that they know how to listen, don't they? I remember times when I was growing up in North Carolina, and I would come home at the end of the day of school, and things happened, and it was just so fun being able to just tell my mom about it. And the thing about it is that whenever we talked, I had her full attention. She always listened. She was an incredible listener, and she is even to this day. So here is Esther. And she enters the picture during the reign of a king by the name of Xerxes. He is the king of Persia. Xerxes is the most powerful man on the planet. His kingdom stretched from India to Ethiopia. He decided that he would throw this incredible banquet. This banquet is probably something that can't even enter our minds how gigantic it was. The book of Esther says that noblemen and leaders from each one of his 127 provinces attended that banquet. And so while that banquet is going on, if you can picture this gigantic banquet, if you can picture this, there is another banquet going on at the same time. And it is with the queen and many of the women, and I'm assuming wives of the noblemen and the leaders of all of the provinces. And so you have the king Xerxes with all of these men in this gigantic banquet room, and then you have the queen and many of the women in a separate banquet room. And in both cases, they are putting on the dog. It is absolutely amazing. Well, look at what verse 10 says. In verse 10, it says, King Xerxes was in high spirits from wine. So you can get the picture. Here is the most powerful man on the planet. He is surrounded by hundreds, if not thousands, of attendants at his banquet. The wine is flowing, and he's beginning to feel it. And then verse 11 says this, he commands his servants to bring before him Queen Vashti, wearing her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. So picture this. Here he is, and he's beginning to feel a little bit lightheaded now, and he wants to show off his wife. He thinks she's the most beautiful woman in the world. And how better can he feed his pride than by prancing her out in front of the hundreds of attendants at this banquet with her beautiful crown on, so that everybody can see, look at my wife. And so he calls for her. But there's a problem. Vashti did not want to play that game. She refused to go. Now, can you imagine that? Here is a lady who is married to the most powerful man on the planet. She hears that, hey, the king wants you to leave the banquet with the ladies just for a few minutes because he wants to put you on display in front of all of the spectators. And she says, Well, Xerxes was infuriated. It made him feel incredibly disrespected. His advisors convinced him that the only way that he could deal with her insubordination was to dethrone her. And so he listened to them. And he decided that the thing to do to this act of disrespect is to say, you are no longer the queen. As a matter of fact, I never, ever want to see you again. She got off easy, by the way, because in that culture, that could have been sudden death, but it wasn't. He gave her a little bit of grace, he thought, as long as he didn't have to look at her anymore. And so here it is in Esther chapter 2 and verse 21. You may want to flip over there and look at what Esther 2:21 says. During the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. Now, this fact that we just read in verse 21 will become critical later. But please understand this, that now the big search is on. There is this huge search for a new queen. Now, Esther's older cousin, his name is Mordecai. Mordecai advised Esther to enter the contest, but to make sure that she did not tell anyone of her Jewish origin. Now, we've already read in verse 7 of chapter 2 that Esther was a very beautiful young woman. And remember now, so here she is. And remember, there is this search all over the kingdom of Persia for the next queen. And of course, if you're the most powerful man in the world, your goal is to get the most beautiful woman in the world. And that's what he does. He looks for the most beautiful woman in the world. We begin to learn a little bit more about Esther as we flip through the pages of the book. And this is what we learn. We don't know exactly how old Esther was whenever her dad and mom died, but we do know that she was so young that she needed to be adopted. And so her older cousin, Mordecai, took Esther into his household, and she, in effect, became his daughter. He raised her. So the relationship between the older cousin Mordecai and Esther was almost like a father and a daughter. They became incredibly close. And let me just stop long enough to say that this is a beautiful example in the Bible of adoption. I mean, can you imagine a heartbroken little girl whose parents die? We don't know when, and we don't know how, but we know that she is now fatherless and motherless. And we know that her older cousin Mordecai takes her into the family. Now, here's one cultural note that I think is very important for us to understand. In that day, kings had numerous wives. Now, the fact that the Bible acknowledges this does not mean that the Bible condones this. Let me say that one more time. The Bible sometimes reports things that happen without condoning the things that happen. But in that culture and in that day, kings had numerous wives. The Bible is not condoning it, it is simply reporting it. The Bible is very clear that God's intention is that one man be married to one woman for life. And so if you can picture this now, there are scores and scores of beautiful women brought into the palace. And there is this person who is being tapped by Xerxes as, you are the guy appointed by me to find the most beautiful person in the entire kingdom. And so try to picture yourself. You have been appointed by the king to find the most beautiful woman in the entire kingdom. It is your responsibility, and I can just see this organizational guru saying to people, go find me the most beautiful woman you can find. He brings her in, and he looks at her, and he thinks, okay, maybe. And so you have like this room full of ladies who are potential future queens. Look at verse 10 of chapter 2. In verse 10 of chapter 2, we see that Esther is now brought into the king's palace. And I want you to see how I concluded that Esther is a good listener, because look at verse 10 of chapter 2. Esther had not revealed her nationality and family background because Mordecai had forbidden her to do so. She listened. But that leads me to the second quality in this woman of influence. She is smart enough to heed advice. Look at verse 20. But Esther had kept secret her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do, for she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. That is such a great testimony to me. That she not only listened, but she took advice. And I believe that women of influence take advice, whether that advice be given to her by her mother, by her grandmother, by her peers, by friends, by her husband, by whomever. Women of great influence take advice. They realize that they're always needing to learn. That's true, by the way, of men of influence too. We're always open to advice. We're always willing to listen to what people have to say. We learned earlier that Esther's Jewish name is Hadassah. But I can hear Mordecai saying right now, never refer to yourself as Hadassah. It's a dead giveaway. If you say you're Hadassah, they're going to know you're a Jew. And so she ended up coming up with the Persian name of Esther. This word, this Persian word and name, Esther, means star. And that's a fitting name, isn't it? Because she is certainly the star of this story. And so she's in the court now. She's one of many women who have been chosen to be the potential queen for Xerxes. And she grows to become known as a person of charm, as a lady of dignity, a lady of grace. And so this individual who is in charge of finding the queen spends an entire year grooming her and polishing her and training her on how to approach the king. She's rising head and shoulders above every one of the other ladies brought into the kingdom with the potential of being the queen. And this man, this one in charge, says, I think she's it. And so I'm going to really pour into her. I am going to train her. I'm going to help her. I'm going to guide her. I'm going to make sure she knows exactly how to act in the king's presence. And look at verse 15 of chapter 2. And Esther won the favor of everyone who saw her. And then look at 2:17. Now the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. So let's look at the big picture now. Here is a Jewish young virgin who is gorgeous. Xerxes doesn't have a clue that she's Jewish. All he knows is she's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. She's been trained and groomed for a year by my right-hand man, and I can tell that she's going to be perfect to be queen. And that leads me to the third characteristic of a woman of influence. A woman of influence is courageous. You know, all of us have probably heard the definition that courage is not the absence of fear, it is doing what is necessary even when you're afraid. Well, I think that characterizes Esther's life. Well, it appears that Mordecai had some kind of a minor role in the kingdom. There was some task or responsibility that he had, because he is referred to consistently as someone who sat outside the gate. And so you have the idea that he's sitting outside the gate of the palace with some responsibility before Xerxes. Sitting outside the gate, Mordecai overhears a conversation between two men at the gate. This conversation is two men who are angry with the king, and they begin to plot his assassination. I wonder why they were so mad. I have a theory. My theory is that these two men wanted to kill Xerxes because through the course of time, they became bonded and emotionally attached to Queen Vashti. And when they saw Vashti banished from the kingdom, they were extremely angry. And so they just wanted to get him back. And so they were plotting the assassination of the king. But Mordecai, the one who raised Esther, overheard the conversation. Look at chapter 2, verses 22 and 23. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were hanged on a gallows. All of this was reported in the annals in the presence of the king. So do you see what's going on here? Mordecai overhears an assassination plot, and these two men end up getting killed because the assassination plot is discovered. It is overheard by Mordecai. He nips it in the bud, but there's one problem. If you save the king's neck, you need to be rewarded. I mean, it's only common courtesy. If you do something to foil an assassination plot for the most powerful man on the planet, you need to be given something. Maybe a tenth of the kingdom, maybe 100 horses, maybe a gigantic plot of land. You need to be given something. The problem is, it was overlooked by Xerxes. Now, let's talk about Haman. We already know that Xerxes was the most powerful man in the kingdom, on the earth at his day. The second most powerful man was Haman. I want you to know about Haman. He was wealthy. He was powerful. He was the chief advisor to Xerxes. Everybody knew that Haman was a force to be reckoned with. He was powerful. He had an incredible ego. He felt his authority. Whenever he left the palace, people they just literally bowed down to him because they realized, there's Haman, the second in command. There's the vice president, the second in command. Man, we need to show our respect for him. But you need to know this about Haman too. He was a little bit off. I think he was deranged. I think that he was emotionally unstable. I think that he became so full of himself that he ended up becoming mentally unstable, and to the point that his importance blew up so much in his mind that if you did not show him the respect that he thought he was due, you had to pay. And that's where he was. So look at Esther chapter 3 and verse 2. Everybody, when they see Haman, they kneel down. Well, everybody but one. Verse 2. But Mordecai would not kneel down or pay him honor. And so can you imagine this? You're Haman, you're the second in command. Everybody fears you. And yet there is this Jewish man outside the gate. Yes, he has a little bit of authority, but not much. He's sitting at the gate in a position of responsibility, but his authority is nothing like yours. But if you're Haman, you are egotistical. You are ambitious. You are insecure. You are a man full of yourself. And so what happens? He becomes irate over Mordecai's insubordination. He persuades King Xerxes in this way. He goes to him and he says, there is this man. He only has a little tiny position in your kingdom. He sits outside the gate. Whenever I walk out of the palace, everybody kneels down and they show me the respect that I deserve, except this one man, this Jew. I want him dead. And that's exactly what he convinced the king that he should do. And he said, furthermore, not only do I want him dead, I want all of his people dead. My guess is Xerxes has other things on his mind. He has other matters under consideration. And so what does he do? He kind of, with a flip of his finger, says, go do your thing. And so here is Haman, and he is now on a mission to kill Mordecai, and he has permission from the king to not only kill Mordecai, but to kill every single other Jew. But here's the one thing that Xerxes doesn't know. He doesn't know that his new queen is a Jew. He just gave a death sentence to his beautiful, new, popular queen. And so are you beginning to see the tension that is taking place in this story now? Haman is a man on a mission. Get Mordecai dead. He's on a mission. Kill all of his people. Now, when Mordecai gets word of what Haman is planning, he realizes he has to get word to Esther. I've got to tell her what this man is trying to do. I've got to tell her that there is this plot that Xerxes endorsed. That Haman not only kill me, but kill every single Jew in all of the provinces among Persia. He has been given the authority to commit genocide of our people in all of the provinces of Persia. And so this is what he does. He goes to Esther and he simply asks her this question in chapter 4 and verse 14. He says, Esther, who knows but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this? In other words, Esther, why are you the queen? Because God in his sovereignty, in his magnificent wisdom, knew that Haman would become deranged. He would become possessed. He would be a man who would not be denied. He would want to wipe out every Jew from the face of the earth. And who knows? Maybe God put you in there as queen to keep this from being carried out by this maniac. But the problem is, Esther has a major, major challenge. It had been 30 days since Xerxes had even called for her. And there was this rule. Remember now, we're talking about Persia. You've heard of the law of the Medes and the Persians? Once a law is made, it is inviolable. And so there was this law that was outlined by Xerxes that said, no one can come into my inner court unless I invite them. And if anyone breaks that rule and approaches my inner court without me inviting them, they have to die. That is the law. And so there is her dilemma. She has to get word to the king that this maniac has a plot to not only kill her people, but kill her. But how does she do that? Because if she goes into the inner court to communicate it to her, if he does not raise the golden scepter and give her the indication that you have my open arms to come and talk to me, she is subject to death. But I want you to look at what Esther does in chapter 4 and verse 16. She thinks about it and she says, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Do you hear what she's saying? I'm going to enter the inner court where the king is. Everybody knows that if you do that, you're dead. But I have to do it. I have to do it. My people are in peril. I have to do it. If I die, then I die. But this is something I must do. You know, I have met so many mothers through the years who've had the same courage when it comes to their children. I've talked to mothers who have literally walked into crack houses in order to pull their son or daughter out of it. They were courageous. They would do anything in order to protect their family. They would not be denied. That's the heart of a mother. And so here's Esther. And she says, I'm going to do it. If I die, I die. And then fourth, Esther, as a woman of faith, believes in prayer and fasting. Remember, for all of her life, Esther has followed the advice of Mordecai. Now, this time, following his advice may mean her life. But if God is with her, she's totally willing to do it. Look at chapter 4, verses 15 and 16. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. But I want you to see this thing of beauty. She has courage, but she knows that I've got to give this over to God big time. If God does not bless this venture, I'm dead. And so I want you to gather the biggest prayer meeting among the Jewish people in the kingdom that has ever been. And not only that, would you ask them over the next 3 days to not only entreat God for me, but don't eat anything. Be so consumed with my success in this venture that you don't even think about food for the next 3 days. That's what I want you to do, all of my Jewish brothers and sisters. She was a woman of fasting and prayer. And so after 3 days, Esther approaches the king. And what happens? Lo and behold, he holds out the golden scepter. And she realizes, thank you, Jesus. Thank you for answering all those prayers. And so she walks up to the king and she touches the golden scepter. And the king simply asks one question, Esther, what do you want? What's on your mind? What's on your heart? Ask me anything. As a matter of fact, you ask me anything, I don't even care what it is. Ask me for half of the kingdom. I'll give you half the kingdom. Ask me anything. And this is what she says. She said, Dear king, what I want you to do is I want you and Haman to come to a banquet tonight and just let the three of us eat together. We'll talk then. And so they go to a banquet that night, and you have 3 people there. You have Esther, you have King Xerxes, you have Haman, the second most powerful man in all of the kingdom. They eat together. The king is now prying. He's dying of curiosity. He wants to know, what do you want? What do you want? And she said, Dear king, would you be patient with me? And would you just please allow me just one more day? And would you tomorrow please come back and let's just have one more banquet? I'll tell you then. And so King Xerxes is kind of like, he's flabbergasted. He's befuddled. He doesn't know why in the world this is taking so long for her to come out with it. But she is led by the Holy Spirit. She's led by God. And God is giving her the wisdom to know exactly what to do and what to say. And so Haman knows that tomorrow I'm going to be going back to another banquet with Xerxes and with Esther. I don't have a clue what it's about. Xerxes is thinking, I don't know why she's doing this, but I think she has a reason. So in the meantime, Haman leaves the palace. And when he leaves the palace, everything's cool except for one thing. Again, Mordecai does not bow. And so Haman becomes so mad that he goes home and he tells his family, that stinking Jew continues his defiance against me. I want him dead. His wife, his sons, they all say, listen, you've now been given the authority. Why don't we just build a gallows right now? And so they build this throughout the course of the night. They build this gigantic 75-foot gallows, and they are going to hang Mordecai on it the next day. And all of Persia will know, don't mess with Haman. While the gallows is being built, Xerxes is in bed, but he can't sleep. He can't sleep to save his life. He can't sleep. And so he says to his attendant, would you do me a favor and just read to me? Would you just read to me some of the Chronicles? Read some of the records. My guess is he thought, if anything will put you to sleep, that will. And so the attendant, while the gallows are being built on the other side of the city, the attendant is reading to the king in his chamber. And all of a sudden, he reads about Mordecai foiling the plot of 2 assassins to kill Xerxes. And it occurs to Xerxes, I can't believe this. I didn't honor Mordecai for saving my life. What was I thinking? That is absurd. I can't believe that. I've never done anything like that before. I've got to make this right. And so the next morning, he goes to court. And who is the very first person he sees in court? He sees Haman. And he goes up to Haman and he says to Haman, I have only one question for you, Haman. Tell me something. How do I honor a man in the most magnificent way that I possibly can? Just you tell me, what do I do for a man in order to honor him and make him feel like he is absolutely like just awesome? Well, if you're Haman, here's what you're thinking. The king is getting ready to honor me in front of everybody. He's going to honor me in front of everybody. So look at Esther 6, 7 through 10. So Haman answered the king, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe for the king has worn. Have them bring a royal robe the king has worn, and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor, and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before them, this is what is done for the man whom the king delights to honor. And so here's what the king says to Haman. Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. And can you imagine what you're feeling right now? You are Haman and your heart sinks. You thought the king was going to honor you in front of the entire kingdom, but now the king is getting ready to honor your arch nemesis, the man you hate, the man who has shown blatant disregard for your power in the kingdom. And so Haman does it. He parades Mordecai through the city streets, and he says, this is what happens to the man the king honors. And then after he goes through that farce in his mind, he goes home. He's telling his family what happens. And then all of a sudden, there's this knock on his door. One of the king's attendants said, hey, the king wants you to come right now to the palace. Esther's there, the king is there, and they're ready for the banquet. I think Esther is now going to tell the king finally what she wants. And so he gets there. They're sitting around the table, and this is what Esther says. The king says, are you going to finally tell me? And Esther says, I'll tell you. There is this madman, and he is trying to kill me. He is trying to kill my people. He wants to commit genocide on my race. He wants to wipe us off the map. He wants to kill us. And Xerxes says, who is this man? And Esther said, he's sitting right there. Your second in command, Haman. That's what he's been trying to do. And so within 5 minutes, Xerxes has Haman hung on the very gallows that he made for Mordecai. Do you see the sovereignty of God at work? Do you see how God is exercising his great power? And do you see that a woman of influence would do anything to protect her family?